Are live. BC Simon here, and this is Ceausescu's Lost Children, Episode 2. We are with Harry Clark, orphan adopted Romanian, to England. It's nice to see you, Harry.
Nice to see you. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine, and I'm so happy to have you here because you're going to show people a side of Romanian adopted Romanians. I don't want to say orphans because you're no longer an orphan, you're an
No.
adult. And you're going to show them a positive side that they've not really seen, or the misconception is not going to be fulfilled with you.
Yeah, well, I'm in England, so you speak about Romanian adoption in England, and people immediately think of the early to mid 1990s, um, post the fall of communism, post the fall of Ceausescu, and the country Romania being opened up to the Western world, and that's, I suppose, where I fall into it, really.
Absolutely. And I want to start with a little bit about you. So you were living in the orphanage for quite a few years.
Yes, I was. Well, I was lucky or unlucky enough to be born on the day of the revolution, 22nd of December 1989, in a small town in the far south of Romania called Juju, which is on the border of Bulgaria on the River Danube. Um, and yeah, born December the 22nd, 1989. In March 1990, so at around 8 to 10 weeks old, my mum could no longer look after me, so she put me into the local orphanage, where I stayed for about 3 years, maybe three and a half. In that time, I've got some memories and some images that I've taken away from there. Not the nicest, but it's helped me. Um, it's helped me make who I am now from that. And whilst I was in there, every couple of days in the orphanage, my mum would come to look after me, to see me. She never wanted to put me into there. She was forced to put me in there, not through anything that she's done wrong, but just through the situation of Romania as a communist country and the fall of communism, really.
Yeah, and what I really enjoyed about what you were saying to me is you had a very unique story in the sense that your mom visited you
Mm.
all the time, and she actually lived around the corner from the orphanage.
Yeah, the orphanage was or is the only orphanage in Juju on Strada 23rd of August or 23 of August. And she lived no more than 200 meters away, and that's where she still lives now. And when I go and visit her every few months, she still lives in the same flat, on the same road, in the same place.
And something that I've never heard yet was that you now have a lovely daughter, and can you talk about what you do
Yeah,
with her?
yeah, of course. So I'll start from the beginning. Obviously, being adopted, I've known ever since day one of being a child that I've been adopted. I've never really thought anything of it. Yes, I've had the name, oh sorry, the birthplace of Romania on my driving license and in my passport, but it was only when I was in my mid 20s. I'm now 31, nearly 32. So in my mid 20s, a family member said to me, "Have you ever thought of going back?" And the honest answer is no. It never even crossed my mind or came onto my radar. Um, so in late 2016, I started the hunt for my family in Romania, which was a bit trickier than what I thought. Um, but when I eventually got connected with the children's services in Bucharest, they did an amazing job, Katrina, and they found my family in about 12 weeks. So early 2017, Children's Services contacted myself saying my family had been found and they're more than happy to meet you.
That's incredible. And I think a lot of people go into these meetings with a notion that the world is going to change and their life is going to become better and more fulfilled. What did it do for you?
The only
I apologize.
the only real reason I ever did this is to put a face to the name Mum, because obviously everyone's got a mum, and I've known the name Mum and I've known the country Romania, but I've never had a picture and I've never had a face to put to the name. So June the 27th, 2017, it was a Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. I went down to the social services building in Juju, where I'd arranged to meet my mum and have a meeting with her. This is the first time ever that an orphan or an adoptee from south of Bucharest has ever been reconnected with their family. So yeah, I met my mum, which was quite an experience, and she told me in the meeting only lasted 15 minutes. She said that I've got two brothers and two sisters, and they were outside the room that we were meeting in, and they wanted to meet me, which was quite a surprise.
And how was that finally? Like you were a kid growing up, you had never met your own blood since you were very, very young. And there you are holding hands, being right next to the people that share your blood and your genes.
Oh well, it was quite special. When I saw my two brothers and my two sisters, I looked at them, and they looked exactly the same as me when I was their age. I met my mum when I was 27. My eldest brother at the time was 24, and the youngest was my sister, who would have been 14. And right the way through from 14 to 24, I looked exactly like them at every stage.
That's incredible. You know, I hear so many stories about that. And when I see someone such as yourself who's so positive and you can recite down to the hour and the minute, it shows how meaningful it was to you.
Oh, it was massively meaningful. And the meeting in social services only lasted 15 or 20 minutes. And it was agreed that the meeting would take place there for my safety and benefit, and for my mum's safety and benefit, to make sure that we weren't going to kill each other or go crazy, which we didn't, and we had no intentions of. And then after that, we went out for the rest of the day. We found a local restaurant and just spent the day there talking, really. Well, catching up from 25 years of separation, I suppose. And
And did you
she asked
speak
me a few.
Romanian?
No, I've learned some. The more time I spend out there, the more I learn, and the longer that I'm out there, I just seem to pick up on it. But as a general rule, I am shocking with languages. I can barely speak English properly, let alone Romanian.
You're doing a good job with it. So you would go out there regularly and you'd
Yeah.
bring someone with you.
Yeah. So I went out for the first time in June 17. I stayed there for 3 weeks. Not all with my family, but a lot of it. And then I went back for Christmas and New Year. And yeah, at the age of 27, I spent my first Christmas with my mum, which isn't bad going, I don't think. Then
Wow.
the following year in February 2018, I took my daughter out with me, who would have been 3.5 at the time. And I took her out to meet Grandma Romania and my family. And she absolutely loves it. She thinks it's hilarious, amazing. that Daddy has got a mummy in England and a mummy in Romania, and that she's got another grandma, Grandma Romania.
And she, what does she think about the Romanian language and the experience?
Um, she's the perfect age to really pick up in the language. She thinks the experience is amazing, and the whole thing's a little bit of a fairy tale, magical story, really. And when she comes back to England, or when we finish a trip out there, she tells everyone at school about it, all of her friends, and yeah, they all think it's quite special and different, really. And
And
no
what's so
one,
remarkable, Harry, is that we as adopted Romanians don't find it strange that we want to visit and share that with the people we love. And I want to know how you feel about, when people do ask you, why would you go back?
why would I go back? Um, I've never, well, until my mid-20s, I'd never even thought of going back because I actually forgot that I was adopted. Um, but now that I've gone back, it's just an amazing fairy tale story, really. Um, and 18 months ago, before coronavirus, August 2020, I was out there with my brother, living with him, and we had a meal with some of his neighbours, and I'd never met them and they'd never met me. But within 30 seconds of me sitting down at the table, the lady, she said to me, or the wife, she said to me, "You can take the boy out of Romania, but you can't take Romania out of the boy." And within 30 seconds, she knew that I was Romanian.
Oh,
And
it's
it just,
incredible. You show up at the airport, you go anywhere, and they look at you, they look at your document, they speak to you in Romanian, and they say, why don't you speak Romanian?
oh, it's so hard. And I, I drove through Bulgaria to Greece a few years ago, and I crossed the Romanian Bulgarian border at Ruse, and they said to me exactly that. "You're Romanian, speak Romanian to us." And I said, "No, English passport," which was,
Uh,
it was a bit of a shame. And I would love to be able to speak Romanian. I'd love to be able to speak or be bilingual, but it's hard work.
I think like it's it's difficult because a part of, at least for me, and I'm not sure if this is for you as well, when you go there and you your inclination is you guys kind of like gave me away, so you can adapt to me speaking English.
Well, when I met my mum for the first time, I had to take a translator with me because no one in the family speaks English. This is what I was led to believe. I met my mum, I met everyone, we were having a meal, we were in the restaurant all afternoon, and my youngest sister, well, she piped up in English and said, "I speak English." Um, yeah, 14 years old. She she didn't really give too much away to my mum or to my brothers and sisters, but we spoke in very good English. And from then on, she acted as the translator for us.
And that's great.
Mm.
Like it seems as if you went through this experience without expectations and it became everything that you wanted.
I never had any expectations from this. The only thing I ever wanted to try and get or try to do was put a face to the name Mum, which I did within, well, the day I met her. And everything after that has been a fairy tale. I could
Uh,
never ask for more.
when I speak to you about this journey, you're not only just going and visiting, you're driving from England to Romania.
Yeah. So there's a bit more to it than that. When I was adopted, dad and a friend, the people who adopted me, my dad in England, he drove from England to Romania. But in the meantime, my mum and dad from England, they lived in Romania for the year before my adoption, and they used to drive to and from the country. It's about 1,800 miles, 2,500, 3,000 kilometers maybe. Um, and yeah, so when I went back to find my family, I started off the ritual of driving from England to Romania. But nowadays I've got Google Maps and Siri, and she does it all for me. And Dad's actually shown me some of the maps and directions that they used in the early 90s, which were nothing more than a few notes on a napkin.
So how was your first time driving there?
I like driving in general, but driving in Romania, wow, that's something different. As soon as you get into Bucharest, into the city there, I've never come across tram tracks before, but yeah, you just seem to slip in behind a tram and follow them, which is quite scary, but everyone does it.
And what about the music? The constant honking and cursing?
You have to, as Westerners, we can't drive like Westerners in Romania. You have to drive like them and just let all your inhibitions go, really, and do things you shouldn't do. But it all works. And I've driven 4 years. I've been driving out there, and I've never really seen of any problems. I've heard of quite a few, but you just have to go with the flow sometimes, and it'll all pan out okay.
So I I'm curious how the discussions have gone with your mom in terms of you've got a 14-year-old mediator, and obviously you're not going to speak about certain things in front of or with a 14-year-old.
Um, I'll be honest with you. When I first met my mum, I met her in the social services building in a mediated meeting, which was quite nice. And she asked me a whole bunch of questions to see how much I knew. And I said to her, I know everything. Our stories corroborated, they were the same. Um, she was very open with me. I was very open with her. My youngest sister, Iwana, um, yeah, she's not stupid. No one in Romania is, they know what happened. Um, and they're not hiding behind anything. I've never really hidden anything from her. She's never hidden anything from me. Um, and I'll be honest with you, as a 14-year-old mediator slash translator between a mum and son that haven't spoken for 25 years, yeah, she did well. She got an A+ for that.
That's amazing. And it's so incredible to hear this positive story because there are so many negative experiences that have happened that people wish to have what you've had. And I think what's so beautiful about this honest approach that your birth family has taken is that it's a healthy relationship. I think I can say safely.
Yeah, yeah, massively. I think, to be honest with you, honesty is the best policy. Um, what they did for me was incredible. It's winning the best lottery ever. It's far better than winning the lottery. Um, and yeah, they've been open with me. They've never hidden anything. I've never hidden anything from them. I'm eternally grateful. Um, and I'll be honest, you can't really, or I don't really know how to say thank you. The only way I do know is just by being humble and being grateful for where I am. Because I certainly know there are many more kids out there in Romania and all over the world, in orphanages waiting to be adopted, um, that have got a worse life than me or us.
So, with that appreciation comes an experience, and your experience is has created that level of humility. I'm curious, you spent some years in orphanages. Obviously, it was a bit aided by the fact that your mother would do everything she can to be part of that experience. But what was that experience in an orphanage like? And were there difficulties in that transition to the British culture, lifestyle, and obviously coming from inhumane conditions to posh conditions?
Yeah. So start from the beginning. I was in the orphanage right the way up through to September 1994. Um, so I was in there a good 3 years, and I can remember a couple of vivid memories of cots just next to each other, kids in the cots, rocking, um, going crazy, no attention from adults. There were no windows in the orphanage as well. I've got a couple of photos in the album, um, of just, I suppose, what you'd call a half-built building. They've got a roof on it and walls, but no windows. So in the winter, it was bitterly cold. In the summer, it was stiflingly hot. Um, it wasn't the nicest ever. It's never gonna be. Um, but it wasn't through my own. It wasn't through my mum's fault that I was there. Um, it's just the course of the country, really, and the politics. No one in an orphanage wants to be there, and no mother wants to put their child in an orphanage. They're forced to, not through their own circumstances, through the circumstances of the country.
And when we speak about those circumstances, did you, in your first 3 years, experience sunlight?
I'll be honest with you, I can't really remember. I can't remember a lot, but I've got one vivid memory of being in a cot, cold, um, lined up with a whole bunch of other cots, and that's it. And I must have been three, yeah, 3 years old, sort of a toddler at the time. Yes, there was daylight. I'm not necessarily going to say direct sunlight, um, but there were kids in other parts of the country and other establishments who were a lot worse off than me.
And when you made it to England, what challenges were there for your parents to integrate you?
Um, there's a funny story actually. So I get to England and everything, and they do the adoption process in England. I don't know how it works in the over the water there in Canada, but they go to adopt me, and they say, "Oh, we have the child already." And the adoption and the children and the children's services go, "What do you mean? You've already got the child?" Mum said, "Yes, we put him in the back of the car and we drove him home from Romania." Um, but no, integration as a child, kids are really, really resilient. Um, the younger or the earlier that someone is put into a different situation, social situation, or whatever, they'll adapt more. I adapted very, very well. The only obvious difference was as I was growing up, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, I was physically a lot bigger than everyone else. Um, yeah, so I had, yeah, there were kids my age who were significantly smaller than me, but that's just genetics, really. Um,
In terms of, um, obviously
sorry,
you
sorry.
were
So
in a,
you said socially. At
oh,
school, I had an amazing schooling, an amazing upbringing. Um, I went to a couple of very, very, very special schools. Um, there was no difference. Uh, I'm not did know. I think the teachers knew I was adopted. Um, I was always open with it, but I was just Harry. I looked like everyone else. I had two eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and that was it, really.
so what was your name before Harry, and did you have to adapt to that?
My name in Romania, I was born the name Yanuț Valentin Vladaniu. And I suppose, and then I was adopted Harry Clark in England, and that's the name I've carried on. I suppose the first, the first part of it was when you're 16 years old in England, you get something called a national insurance number, similar to Social Security, and it allows you to work. And when I received my one, it had my Romanian name on it, which was quite funny. And I wasn't expecting that, but it had it on there, and I've still got it now on the little credit card size card.
Is that because the name change hasn't taken?
Yeah, no, the name change has taken. In England, when you get given your national insurance number, it happens at birth, and then obviously it carries on and it gets forgotten about until you're ready to work at the age of 16. I obviously got given mine upon entering the country / adoption, so the early 90s, and it just got forgotten about, I suppose.
I
But
had the exact same thing happen, and I've got documents that say Claudio and some that say Brandon.
yeah,
And when I went on national TV with Romania in 2014, they started calling me the boy with two names because they had no idea what to make of it. And Canada does have a similar system. So I think now changing those documents is a hassle and you got to do it everywhere.
all of my other documents, my driving license, my passport, they're all in my English name of Harry. And that's whenever I've filled out any paperwork, it's under the name of Harry. It's just a transition period through into country adoption.
And
That
I love your positivity. You're
at
just
the
everything, you find the bright side in absolutely everything. I mean, you came from a cot where you were sitting, rocking, you probably couldn't even walk, and you still see the bright side in like absolutely every bit of it.
oh, you have to really. There are people out there in the world who have things a far lot worse off than we do, and I do. And I'm just eternally grateful to have won the biggest lottery ever.
And it really is. Like, if you consider there were potentially hundreds of thousands of children at that time, and we were amongst that 10 to 20,000 that
Yeah.
actually got out
Mm. There were
healthy.
300. There were 350 adopted to England and 700 adopted through Ireland. But yeah, there were thousands all over the world. I know a lot went to North America. There was a small amount of adoption in Romania of Romanian orphans. I don't know the numbers, but those ones, yeah, they were lucky as well.
So, does your daughter think of herself as Romanian?
Yeah, she sees herself as half Romanian. Daddy's from Romania, so I'm Romanian. Mummy's from England, so I'm from England. She gets the 50-50 split.
My daughter's the same. She thinks she's like, I'm Russian and I'm Romanian and I'm Canadian.
Like, to her, she's 6 years old now. It's just a story. It's an adventure. It's a fairy tale. Um, it's just something that she's embraced, really.
And how is it to be a parent, especially as a guy, because we hadn't met anybody of our own blood, and we dreamed of having that ability to nurture an individual that and care for because it's inherent in who we are as men, the another individual. And you had your daughter. That must have been the greatest, and still is the greatest moment of your life.
Oh yes, it having her changed everything really for me. And I had her when I was in my mid-20s. Um, until having her, I hadn't really thought about parenthood. But now that I have, I can actually think back and be in and think with my mum and going and putting me up for adoption. And Christ, if I had to put her up for adoption, it would be the hardest thing ever to pretty much give your child away, not knowing that you're ever going to see them again and hoping that someone brings them up on your behalf and maybe does a half good job of it. But yeah, I couldn't even think about giving her away.
And in your situation, your mom felt that it was in your best interest to have a shot at going abroad.
Yes, yeah. She only put me up for adoption for my better interest, and I suppose being selfish to herself. You don't get put up for adoption from Romania for the fun of it, or because someone doesn't want you. They do it because they want the best for you, and
And
they know that the best for you might not be in their care or in their country.
and it's interesting because I think your situation's different than many people where some and some people went through just being dropped off on the sidewalk, or some went through just being left in a hospital, or the parents went to a village and offered money in exchange for the kid and the parents took it. There are so many different variables with an un right at the time unregulated process.
Yeah, you're right there. The thing with Romanian adoption is at the time the country was closed off under Ceausescu, the fall of communism, the fall of what happened very soon after the fall of the Iron Curtain, um, and through the media in England, the fall of communism, and all of these children that needed looking after, the media actually did quite a good job of middlemaning or advertising children needing help to Westerners wanting to help. Um, but yeah, inter-country adoption back then in the early 90s, it was very much unheard of. The rules were unheard of. No two adoptions were ever the same. No one really knew what they were doing. All that they did know is that the children leaving Romania and going off to Western countries would be getting a better life. And the ladies in the orphanage, they knew that. They knew that they couldn't give the children a better life under their care and with the resources that the state had provided them. So they were more than happy for the children to go off to Western countries and be well looked after. Yes, there was some form of sale, money changing hands, but this is a very corrupt, unregulated country at the time. You can't tar everyone with the same brush, I don't think, at all.
Oh, absolutely. And your story is a good example of that because a very few parents actually visited the orphanage and spent time with their child
Mm.
on a weekly basis. And
I
I
think,
think it's such an interesting perspective to put forward because not everything was that sold into sex slavery or uh, bargained for. Some cases were like yours, where your mother just felt like she just couldn't do it and she needed some help.
yeah, of course you couldn't do it. No one in Romania could do it. The country had nothing. The country was poor. There was no food in the supermarkets. There was no milk. There was nothing. Ceausescu had sold everything um, to line his own pockets in the Communist Party. So any parent, any parent would go, right, okay, I can't do it myself. I'll put the child into the authorities' care. thinking the authorities could do something. The authorities couldn't do anything because they were in exactly the same position. They had no state funding. Um, so yeah, lo and behold, a bunch of Westerners come round to willingly take the children out of their care into the Western world. They're going to let them go because they know they're going to have a better life in the Western world than what they can be given, and how they can be cared for under the state orphanages and state system.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, especially uh, Romanian orphans, forget that under communism, the people depended entirely on the government. So when you take that away and there's full autonomy to basically try and do what you want, you're going to have that savage capitalism. And then on the flip side, you're also going to have the defenseless people. You toss 50 dogs in a cage, and you're going to see the weak ones die, you're going to see the strong ones survive, and you're going to see the smart ones find some way to mediate.
Yeah, you are, but you've also got to remember that Ceausescu imposed a minimum of 5 children per woman, and anti-abortion laws. So children were being born for the workforce of the country, but the country couldn't provide for the children or the workforce. So it's a little bit of a they've made a rod for their own back, the country, with all the children going into orphanages because they were a byproduct of their own wantings, but failed.
Absolutely. And I wonder now when you visit Romania, do you see a way that you can impact or a way that you want to impact Romania in the future?
Wow. When I visit Romania, I see two completely different countries. I see, when I land in Otopeni, I see Bucharest, the westernized Romania. But as soon as you cross outside of that ring road around the city, you go back 30 years to Ceausescu's time. Um, so yeah, the country has moved forward, but only in Bucharest. I see in a few cities. The rest of the country, in the countryside, is the land that time forgot. Really, in places. How could I?
Yeah,
How could I impact it? I'm a one-man band. I'm never going to be able to do anything off of my own back. Change needs to happen from within. And I honestly believe that change will only happen when the people want change, because the political parties now in charge are exactly the same as the Communist Party back in the 80s and 90s. The only missing part is Ceausescu. All of the SDP, the Social Democratic Party, are the same old communist cronies who are knocking on in age now and really getting on. But it's just the same under another guise.
absolutely.
And
And
I,
I
I,
that's why I created this channel
I think
because
also for the
go ahead.
country to change, a country leaving communism and becoming democratic doesn't happen all of the time, and there is no set rule book or time lapse for that to happen. So it's a bit of an unknown, really, and a work in progress.
Yeah, it's one of those paradoxes coming from the West, and a lot of Romanian orphans go there and think I can do things. But your perspective is very honest and real because you can't change something unless you're changing from within. And that means you need to somehow, you need to, first of all, speak the language, win elections. You've got to be able to allocate budgets without theft. You've got to be able to have workers and policies in place so that those workers are held accountable for the funds that are released.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous amount of stuff that goes into it instead of just, I'm going to go over there and sure, you can impact one or two lives, but on a large scale, you're right.
I've spoken to my mum about this out there. Deep down, she's a communist. She always will be. In communist times, everybody was paid the same. Everybody had the same. They had the same food. They had the same house. They were allocated the size of the house depending on the number of people in the family. Everything was given to them on a plate. So, come the fall of communism and people having to go to work and earn their money as opposed to be given it was a very big turn for the country and the people as well. And the whole ideology of communism to democracy it's still in progress.
Yeah, and when we speak about service industries, when I go to England, I in London, I've never experienced better customer service and such a high standard. When you go to Romania, could you talk about what that shock was like? Sorry, Harry, your audio's a bit cut out. I can't
Can you hear
hear.
me?
Oh, now I can, yeah.
Sorry. So when you go to Romania and you have an issue with something and you make a complaint, nobody really wants to accept it and be held responsible for it because it's just part of their, I say, heritage, culture, history of being communists. Everybody's the same and nobody wants to step up to the mark.
Yeah, I
So
see that too.
the two countries, or the Romania and the Western world, are completely different, and people who haven't been there aren't going to understand it until they have been there.
Yeah, there's no safety nets. Like if you go in there with $10 million and you start building an empire of your own, it all disappears in a day. There's no social programs, there's no social services. It doesn't matter how much money you have.
No, it doesn't, um, and that's because the country needs to. It's still adapting from communism to democracy, and it's still only 30 years um, since the fall of communism, and yeah, it's going to be a long, slow process, I think.
I think so too. So what do you do right now in England?
I work for a small company. I'm a tree surgeon. I'm involved with forestry and trees.
Oh, so you're a brute type guy. You go in there and you
Yeah,
you pick up the trees, you toss them
yeah,
up on the truck.
yeah. I'm an outdoors person.
That's awesome. So when you go to Romania, you must have been in paradise.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. When I go back to Romania and either I drive or I land at the airport, the minute I cross that border, it's almost like a weight is off my shoulders, and it's just, oh, I'm home. Um, but I love the country. I love driving around it, exploring, walking, just seeing what the country's about, really, from the biggest cities to the smallest villages and everything in between.
And have you been to the mountains?
Yeah, I've been to the mountains. I've been up to Faglash. Um, yeah, it's it's a very different way of life. It's completely different.
So would you ever consider retiring or returning to Romania in some capacity?
Yes, I could quite easily and quite happily. It's a very, very simple way of life, just like myself, not too complicated. Um, I don't need expensive things to make me feel happy. I'm just happy within myself. I could go. It would be very, very hard though. Well, the language barrier is the hardest thing to start with. A lot of people do speak English, which is nice. Um, but I think it's a very, very, very big jump for anybody to move country.
I've said there in on Romanian television a couple months ago, I said there's a lot of things that would have to change in order to make that consideration. And I mean, you can look at places like Cluj where
Mm.
they're on par, but the problem still lies in you're inside of a country where if you go to a hospital, as we saw in that documentary Collective, I'm not sure if you've seen it, they speak about how burn victims went into the hospital and families were being told, you're we're going to kill your family member essentially if you don't pay us extra money in the hospital. It's a big jump from going to the hospital and getting care.
It, yes, it is. And I've had experiences myself where my brother, he's got a little girl who's two now, three. And when she was born, it was a case of how big is the biggest bouquet of flowers for the doctor and the midwives, and how much is the money, and how much is it? And it ended up costing a lot of money, um, just so that it gets you the care, the basic care that you require to give birth, really, and to have a child. Um, but it's bad and sad that it has to be seen that way or done that way, in what is now a free country, part of the EU, um, and heavily influenced by the West.
And I see the same as you, the potential the country has, but I think you're right, because if you look at political theory on transitioning from one political approach to another, it, there needs to be a clean break, which
Mm.
if they're grooming new generations to fulfill the old shoes, it's perpetual. And if you have a new generation that is Western influenced, but they kind of have to be, I'd say, two generations removed to even consider being uh, democratic people by nature.
Yeah, I we're at 30 years at the minute. I think give it another 50, and then I think the country might be somewhere. Um, our generation, I can't see it happening at all. Um, our children's generation, it depends how much of what they pick up through our generation. Um, but yeah, I see it as being a 70-year turnaround.
And that's realistic and very honest because we see the European budgets were available for people to start building businesses and nothing was getting done and European Union was saying, why aren't you guys spending the money? The Romanian government said, well, nobody's applying. And the reason being because they've got to bookkeep and nobody wants to show their books.
Yeah, no, they don't. And corruption's still a big problem out there, massive problem. But that only stems from the people at the top who are and were the former Communist Party. You, it until they go, the country's never going to change. And as sad as it sounds, it needs them to go for the country to prosper.
Absolutely. And I think the toughest part about that is that those individuals have profit off of the sale of children or the horrible experiences that Romanians have endured, and they've bought land cheap as
Yeah.
a result of it, companies, media, everything. And then they run in politics.
Politics is where the money is, but yeah, they've well, they are the SDP are the communists under a new name, and they're still up to their old tricks. And
Oh, absolutely.
the country, they need to go for the country to prosper. And it's every time I go out there, I don't see any change in certain roads being built. The A3 motorway up through from Cluj to Aradia and Timisoara, that still hasn't been joined up. That was meant to have been joined up 15 years ago. Oh, we've gone blank.
Oh, you can't see me? I see you. Oh, you there, Harry? All right, looks like we've lost Harry on here. So, one sec, let me try this. Harry, you there? All right, so on that note, we will close out the show. This is live, of course. And Harry, it was so nice to have you on. It's a shame, sorry, our connections of some sort have had some issues. This is Ceausescu's Lost Children. This has been a. Oh, I think I can get Harry in here now.
Yeah, I'm back.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what happened? I think there was a double window, and because we're live, I was thinking, oh, well, I guess we'll cut 10 minutes short. But I got another question for you before we do that. So if if there is any opportunity for you to make a life in Romania, would your family be open to it? And on such a platform as this, do you see education of uh, the Romanian orphan crisis as something that the world can learn from?
Okay, so back to the first part of the question. Um, my family here in England are very, very willing and backing for me to do anything I want, and they have always given me support on anything I have ever done. So if I wanted to do that and move back out there, they would be more than happy to help, and they're not going to stop me. My family out there, are they going to want me to move back? I'm sure they probably are, but I'm sure they'd more than likely move to England with me, and for me to
Wow.
give them the opportunities that I've been given, and also it sort of returns the favour of I was given the opportunity of a better life by my mum by being put up for adoption, and it's now if I could get them to England, it would be giving them the better life.
That's incredible. And the second part of the question, do you think that the world should be able to learn from uh, our experience?
Yes, I think they should massively. Even just taking it back to basics at school, I struggled massively with reading and writing and basic school literacy. It wasn't until I was about 18 that I could genuinely properly read and write. And since then, I've sort of self-educated myself, not to any particular standard, but I'm very good at conveying myself um, and articulating certain things and just speaking, really. I'd rather speak than write something down.
And you know what? I think for a lot of people it's like that. But I think your outlook, your humility, your desire to and compassion for your birth family situation, your interest in just spreading happiness and joy is such a beautiful thing. And I I believe that your daughter is gonna grow up so happy and proud of you, regardless of where you do or what you do in life and where you go, because what you've been able to do just with that positivity is going to transmit to her, and she's going to express that to the world. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that you have and can share to her.
Yeah, I also think that we in the Western world don't realise how lucky we are, and just some of the small basic things really. We've all got a toilet and a shower and a bathroom. Back in Romania, my brother doesn't have a toilet in his house. It's still an outside toilet. This is a country that's part of the EU now. Their daily life is really back to basics about putting food on the table. There's no luxuries. There's no niceties. Everything is about basic, hand to mouth. Whereas here in the West, everybody's more worried about what clothes they wear, what they look like, what car they drive. And if you haven't been in our situation, you haven't really got anything to compare it to. And I just know that I suppose it just takes it back to being humble and being grateful, really. And I know what I'm just grateful for every bit of bread that's on the table, really.
And that's you have every right, if you wanted to be resentful and to be hateful and hurt. And the approach that you've taken, I think a lot of adopted Romanians are going to see this episode in particular and find so much strength and value in it. And I think you're offering that to them. And I really thank you for doing that and coming on here today and sharing that.
No, you're welcome. I really hope they do as well, because we're all in the same boat together, and we've all won the biggest lottery there is. So yeah, there's nothing to be sad about. It's if we weren't here now doing this, I hate to think where we'd be back in Romania and what we'd be doing and what our life would be like.
Yeah, possibly AIDS infested, dead. The possibilities are endless. And
Well, yeah,
I,
a lot of them, or us who weren't adopted, ended up as children in the sewers in Bucharest and underground in the winter, just to try and get away from the cold, really. Um, so if they had to do that for basic necessities and just to stay alive, yeah, we're lucky to be sat here now in the warm.
absolutely. And I thank you so much. This is Ceausescu's Lost Children, episode 2, with Harry Clark, who shared his positive and uh, very resilient story, but also a message of real hope and humility. So I thank you so
Yeah.
much, Harry.
Thank you very much, Brandon.
Okay, talk soon.
Talk soon.